Okay, good afternoon. We'll get going in just a second. Thankfully, today, no press conferences to watch, so we won't spend the first 20 minutes talking about or listening to Lamont, I'm sorry, to Biden. Not that that was a bad press conference. Actually, I thought it was pretty good, but we'll talk about that in a little more detail today. Mary, how are you? Good to see you. Interesting day in the market. We had all these green days the last, I would say, week or so, all the market consistently hitting new highs, and today was finally the pullback that we're waiting to happen. To those watching, I am still heavy into Viacom. I've made money by selling it a few times, buying it back, flipping it a few times, but my core position is still in that, and that's down. But I still believe it's just too good of a company to not be bought out at some point. So I'll hold on to that. It's up actually today on some rumors of a buyout. Whether that's true or not, rumors are always, when it comes to stocks, you take with a grain of salt, because all it takes is somebody to throw out the rumor. They may be holding a ton of that stock. It jumps up 80 cents and they sell, 100,000 shares and just made $80,000. So you have to be very careful, especially in the age of social media, what rumors and the impact they can have. Yes, that's illegal, but let's not pretend it doesn't happen pretty much all the time. Okay, so from a headline standpoint or things to talk about, I just watched Lamont's earlier press conference. We've had this discussion in Brantford about masks. We've had people at town meetings talking about masks. We've had rallies outside of Exit 53 talking about students wearing masks in school. It's funny, last week or weekend when we had Scanlon on, we talked about the potential shutdown or everybody forced to wear masks, what have you, due to COVID in general. And Scanlon's response was, well, I think the governor's going to leave it up to individual towns to make that decision. My response to that was, don't do that, primarily for the political ramifications. Instead of one person taking the hit, it allows 169 towns to have 169 different debates. And that's not, in general, healthy. We have seen that some people already have been fairly, I don't know if I want to use it nasty, but pretty close to it at Board of Ed meetings when talking about the mask issue. And so you would have had 169 debates on a town side. What should they do, mandate or not? Then 169 separate debates on Board of Eds. And I don't know, that number is the amount of towns. It may be differ based on region or what have you, on debates of whether you should have masks in school. Now, I do think Brantford School District did a smart thing where about 2-3 weeks ago, they came out, welcome back to school kind of thing, and we're going to start with masks. That was smart. Being decisive, whether that's the board or Hamlet, and I have no problem giving Hamlet credit for that if that's him, avoids bullshit. And being decisive avoids all this unknowing stuff. So he came forward and said that, still dealt with some people at town meetings or Board of Ed meetings that were less than pleasant, but still that happens. But then today, Lamont, in my opinion, did the right thing. And Barbara just mentioned this by saying, yes, we're going to open school for at least a month with masks, and then we'll base it on the numbers from there. He did say statewide the COVID numbers are going up. There were some more hospitalizations. That's a concern. And he also pushed significantly for people 12 to 18 to get vaccinated. So we're at a point where a couple things are going to take place. The push to get people 12 to 18 vaccinated, and also there'll be a push now on a national level to get a third booster shot to those that are immune deficient, and soon more, I guess 6 or 7 months after they've had their initial shot. So look, I understand that some people are anti-vaccination. I understand this is not yet FDA approved, and there may be want to hold off for that. Okay, that's your decision. But it does make a difference. Whether you like it or not, all getting vaccinated makes a difference. The people who are getting hospitalized is a much lower percentage if they get it now. People who die is a much lower percentage if they're vaccinated. It is what it is. You don't have to like it or dislike it. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. It just is what it is. And so you take that as you want. But if you don't want to get vaccinated, also be responsible and go out less. Don't go into crowded areas. Take other people's health and their safety into concern. And you did this when you had the flu. You did this if you were sick. You did this if so. If this helps, it doesn't seem crazy to say, all right, I'm going to make a decision and stand by the impacts of those decisions and say, all right, I don't want to do this, so I'm going to stay home. If you're going to yell and scream about somebody about masks, okay, stay home. That's a decision you can make. It doesn't mean you get, when we make a decision, there's impacts to those things. And we can be reasonable and understand that we could discipline ourselves to do those things. Mary's comment, Steve, you were discussing yesterday masking being difficult for hearing impaired students. I was speaking with a friend whose daughter-in-law is a speech therapist in Fairfield County Schools. She said there are see-through masks they use in her schools when doing speech. Wouldn't that work for hearing impaired students? Mary, I think I agree with you. So, and she's posted this publicly. Ray Ingraham's granddaughter is hearing impaired. And his daughter posted some of the, even with hearing aids, even with things that you use, what have you, what a hearing impaired child hears versus someone else may hear. And it could be significantly different. Now, if you're going to put that person in the general population, do you provide clear masks for the general population? Is there a cost related to that? How do you do that? So if you are in a special needs school, so be it. But if your issue is only hearing and you have hearing implements, you may not be in a special needs school. You may be in the general population, maybe going to regular school. And so I think, Mary, I think that makes sense if you're in a smaller setting and we all have those types of things. But part of the learning experience, especially for those people, is to be able to see people's face and their masks or their lips. And that applies to all conversations, not just them with teachers, but with other students, other people in general. And they'd be at a significant disadvantage if they didn't have that. So I don't know the answer to the question. I think it's a good question. It's something the Board of Ed should have to look at and address in some way, shape, or form. I can't say I know for sure the answer. I'm sorry, are we lagging? Okay, so everybody's lagging a little bit. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know why. My internet seems pretty good, but maybe there's some issues. Is it bad to the point that you can't understand what I'm saying? If that's the case, I'll cut it short. We'll go tomorrow. But I think, listen, I've seen those masks that are clear. They make a lot of sense, but can you get those masks for everyone? Maybe they become, if masks become a month or two from now the norm for school districts, maybe that's something that Board of Ed can look into. We have that COVID money. Maybe that's something that we do. But, it is. In talking to so many family yesterday, as I said, over the weekend, I posted that simple question on Branford 7. Where do you stand basically on masks? And there are many people who will post on those things. There are also many who won't. And they send private messages to me and their opinions or what have you. And that's welcome. That's always going to be fine. That's always between us. The vast majority of comments where my kids are fine. Like they tell them to put it on. It may be awkward for a day or two. And then they just, get lost in whatever the heck they're doing. And it doesn't bother them. It was amazing looking through some of the online comments on how parents that we know to be liberal, far left at times, their kids, no, we love it. We want to keep people safe, whatever. And the parents we know to be conservative said, oh, our kids hate it. They can't stand it. I don't believe kids are born Democrat or Republican. So I think we often see what we want to see. Are the kids, bothered by initially? Probably. Everybody is. But over time, most kids don't care. Most kids that I talked to when they first went back, they were just happy and thrilled to be back to school. Now it's a significant part of the discussion about getting schools reopened, right? It appeared to me Hamlet did not want to reopen schools there was no chance he wanted to reopen schools. We had significant discussions about that. Eventually, it opened. When those kids went back to school, the last thing they cared about was having to wear a mask. They just wanted to be with other kids. So the difference in the stress and the mental impacts of not being able to see your friends, not being in school, not being in that learning environment versus being in that learning environment are significantly different than the impacts between wearing a mask and not wearing one. It's not that big a deal. And I'm going to go a step further. I don't know that having rallies against a mask or yelling at Board of Ed members about a mask is setting the greatest example for a child. Sometimes we do things we don't love. And probably explaining to them that this may not be comfortable at first, but we're better off for everybody is a better job of explaining to a child than rallying and yelling. And what I saw from some videos, yelling at Board of Ed members and not exactly threatening them, which is not helpful. It's just not a good thing. Marie, masks are important because we don't always know if your child is sick. It's true. Look, I'm not a doctor. I have no idea if masks work. None. I have nobody, and neither do you. What I do know is scientists have told us they do. That's it. Does this shot work? No idea. But scientists have told me it does. So there's a lot of things that scientists have told me, that doctors have told me, that professionals have told me that I do that makes sense to me. If I want to put a roof on my house, I call a roofer. I don't just jump on my own and have my own opinion. If I want to redo my kitchen, I call somebody who does that. If I want to have electrical done, I call an electrician. If I want to talk politics, I find a politician or somebody who studies politics. If I want to talk about the Knicks, I find somebody who knows about the Knicks. I'm going to doctors because they've suggested, and scientists, they've suggested taking this shot and putting a mask on. That's just what I'm going to do. I get the more trepidation about putting something in your body, but I don't understand the trepidation about putting a mask over your face. That said, if it's not mandated right now and you choose and you definitely want to wear a mask, then don't go to places where other people may not have it. There are consequences for our actions, and when we make a decision, we can also take those consequences into advisement. So I do want to spend some time talking about yesterday in Afghanistan, and I've watched a ton of coverage and read a bunch of articles today, and it's an interesting political dilemma that we're talking about here because you have the Taliban playing an international game as well. So you have this issue where occupation Afghanistan was never going to be positive, right? There's no way. We're not nation builders. We've tried to be in the past. It doesn't work. You can't drastically change an entire generation or multiple generations of people in 10 years, 20 years, even 30 years. Not going to happen. If people are uneducated, don't understand the bigger implications, they're never going to. If you could get to the entire population when they're 5 and get them into a school system and teach them, that's one thing, but that's not what happens. So this is always going to be a losing battle. And to Biden's credit, other presidents have talked about getting out of there. Obama, we had a mission accomplished sign from Bush. Obama had an escalation with a promise that it would be over soon, tried to get out of there. Trump made actually strides to get out and passed a deal that expired in May, but he was no longer president. So I can't blame Trump too much for this. And Biden finally said, listen, I'm going to bite the bullet. If I got to be the bad guy, I'll be the bad guy. There's no question here. Biden dropped the ball when it comes to the timing of this and dropped the ball on how it's going to be done. This should have been organized far, far better, and it's going to have an impact on the rest of the world. But then we have this other dilemma, and it's not, and it's going to be a dilemma for the next 15 years. The Taliban right now is playing a very interesting political game. They realize that if they want to be seen as legitimate in any way, shape, or form going forward, they have to allow Americans to get out safely. They have to at least publicly put on a face that they're being aware of human rights, of women's rights. And they want to be seen as responsible and capable on an international level because we as Americans have enemies. Russia and China are not our friends. Yes, we interact with them. Yes, we trade with them. Yes, we buy and sell from them, but they're not our friends. And they're looking to start legitimizing one of our enemies. So you're seeing the Taliban now. Basically, a report came out today that the Biden administration and the Taliban came to an agreement that the Taliban would allow safe passage of those who wanted to get to the airport, still under U.S. control, and move forward. So that's going to be a very interesting question in 6 months from now, when America's out of this, the Taliban has complete control with no one to stop them. What do they do? What does Russia do? What does China do? We can. I'm not a Donald Trump fan. I did not vote for Donald Trump. And part of the reason I didn't vote for him was the way he treated the rest of the world. We had Obama, who said basically everybody should be working together and we should look at this as one world and we should be international. And he gave huge speeches in Germany and all these other countries. And then we had Trump's agenda, which is basically less interaction with the rest of the world from a military standpoint and strengthen our borders, which you kind of have to do in conjunction. If you're going to say, instead of occupying Afghanistan to try to prevent a terrorist breeding ground, if we're not going to do that, if we're not going to be around the world occupying these territories to prevent it, then we have to make our borders stronger. You can't really do one without the other. So now you have the Taliban in control of Afghanistan. What will Biden do with our borders? Will he respond by saying the same thing actually Obama did by rushing far more agents to the border that Trump did by trying to build a wall, by working to make that wall stronger? And if he does, look at where we are. We're out of Afghanistan, something that Trump started. We would have a stronger border, which is likely needed, something that Trump was a huge advocate for. The China war, Biden has basically doubled down on. So some of the major international policy agendas of the Trump administration will be in place from Biden. And it's an interesting kind of turn of events when we look at what's happened because of and the fallout of this Afghan occupation. It will have long-term ramifications. And my theory is that very soon you're going to start seeing not just Republicans, not just unaffiliated, but even more moderate Democrats start calling for more border security. And in hindsight, Trump may not look as crazy. He's still nuts with the tweets and all the crazy stuff he did. But from a policy perspective, how much longer can the United States be the world's cops? And I think Biden's speech yesterday laid it out for us. We're not going to be nation builders. We're not going to occupy other nations. We have to look at things very differently than we have before. So I'm guessing I might be speaking to a frozen screen right now. I don't know why that's happening. Am I frozen? I guess I am. Okay. All right. I don't know why that happened. I am showing like 100% on my internet connection. Everything seems to be moving fine, but I don't know why that happened. But that said, most of you probably didn't hear anything I just said for the last 5 minutes. So we'll cut it short for today. If there's some connection issue, now it seems to be many people having this problem. I'm looking at my connection now and it's phenomenal. So I'm not sure what's happening there, but I'll try to reset this and see what happens for tomorrow. That said, there were some questions that came in about Tabor. I'll walk through that process, especially the legal issues that happened with Tabor 10, 12, 14 years ago. Many people are not familiar with what happened. It was something of a disaster when it took place. But the long and short of it is, developer came in. It looked like everybody was for it. They changed their application to be more affordable housing, and then suddenly the town was against it. This was during DeRoss administration. If people don't remember, DeRoss was in office for 6 years, from I believe 97 to 2003, left for 4 years, then 2007 to 2013 was back in office. And so the first time he was in office, the town took by eminent domain the Tabor property. Then he left office. Some things happened. It was a little bit crazy. Cheryl Morris was in office. There was some issues with the attorney, what have you. And DeRoss came back, and that's where all the lawsuits were taking place. And the town ended up losing it. DeRoss blamed the Cheryl Morris administration, by the way, both Democrats. Initially, the town not just lost it, but it was $4 million to the property owners, but then like 16 or $17 million to the developers in lost revenue because the town took it. On an appeal, the town won the appeal, not a change in the decision. It just said that those developers couldn't collect because they didn't have rights to the property at that time. There was an unrecorded option. So on a technicality, we saved some money. We still ended up at about $20 million in taking that property that we never should have taken. We didn't have a right to take it. So the irony of all the Parkside discussions about, affordable housing, and we watched the room filled with Democrats with signs saying we support Parkside and you're racist if you're not for this and all that nonsense, it was the Democrats who led an eminent domain taking of property to prevent affordable housing on Tabor. It's just, so if you're new to the town and you're not understanding some of the history, this is the actual history. And I get if Brockett doesn't get it. I certainly get if Coughlin, the young man, doesn't get it. But this is the history in our town. If you're wondering why Walsh wasn't done years ago, because the Democrats didn't get it done. If you're wondering why it took so long to get a senior center, it's because the proposal put forward by DeRoss, which was called the senior center swap, was ridiculous. And it was the Democrats on the Board of Finance that laughed that out of the room. If you're wondering why you didn't have a Branford Hills Park when DeRoss was in office, when the Democrats had control, it's because they never took down the school. Jamie Cosgrove got in and did it. If you're a new Democrat, and many are, because the old Democrats really aren't involved right now. With Jamie in office, they backed away. If you don't know this, Jamie Cosgrove was a longtime Democrat. So if you're a new Democrat and you have any ideological Democratic stances, you're probably more in line with Cosgrove than a Republican, like people like me, who's a Democrat and pretty much agrees with most of what Cosgrove's done. But there's a ton of history here. And if you're new to the Democratic Party and you, for some reason, got involved with the DTC, I've been there, I did that too, without knowing the history of the town, talk to people who know the history of the town. Not the partisan history, but the actual history of the town, the last 15, 20 years, and what's happened. And I can tell you this, the Democratic Party has not been of its right mind for some time. It just hasn't. There's massive turnover. There's ideas that don't make sense. I'll give you an example. In 2017, Jim Finch and Jamie Cosgrove had meetings with a developer, energy conservation, what have you, company that audited our town buildings. And they came back and said, listen, we're going to charge you a certain amount of money, and we are going to go and make all these buildings energy efficient. The savings over time, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it was, will offset that and pay for the energy conservation costs. So it's called a self-funding plan. This was back in 2017. It goes to all the needed bodies. They all approve it. Goes to the Board of Finance, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. They approve it easily. It goes to the RTM. And the Democrats fight it mercilessly. We can't afford, we had plenty of money in the bank. We could easily afford it. At one point, Jim Finch, the finance director who was given extensions by DeRoss, signed by DeRoss, in office by a Democrat for years, is still the guy who suddenly got stupid, apparently, when Cosgrove got in office based on the Democrats. They were basically saying to him, we couldn't afford this. The finance director says, it's self-funding. We put money out now and we save it. It's like putting solar panels on your house. It's self-funding. It makes sense. And they all voted against it. That's not right in the head. That's not saying you're for environmental stuff when then you vote against it because a Republican had the idea. That's nonsense. When we watch Brockett do a video about Tabor, and he shows the trail and he shows some things that he likes about it, but he doesn't show the massive solar farm that's there because that's not helpful politically. That's intellectually dishonest. Cosgrove has been so pro-environment, it's not funny. In fact, he's been so pro-environment, he's been criticized by Republicans in this town on the far right. So when I'm here talking about Brockett, I don't, again, personally, maybe he's a great guy. And this is politics, and everybody lies during political season, right? It happens. But if you're new to the Democratic Party or you're new to town and you're looking at this election, you're looking at the decision you have to make, get a sense of the history first. before you like their video and share their post and say, wow, this is amazing, this is eye-opening, I didn't know this, go to somebody who may actually have some knowledge of the history of the town and say, is this accurate? And if you want to come to me and do that, we'll do it. We'll have that conversation. We'll do it publicly. Ask the questions publicly. And I'd be glad to answer those. And we have source documents for them. These meetings were recorded. There are meeting minutes. They're real. I'm not making this up. And this is just from some questions that came in. The one other question, and I would say question or Facebook comment that came in, the town put out some documentation that those that are over 55 or 65 are 100% vaccinated. Now, I understand that when a statistic is put out that 100% vaccinated, one may think that means every single person over 65 is vaccinated. That's not how it works. When we have statistics, we have a margin of error. So, when we look at polling and it says Trump was leading Biden 51 to 49, that's a margin of error. It could be 53 to 47 because we measure that in. So when we look at 100% vaccination rate, we're not using that to say every single person over 65 is vaccinated. What we're using that to say is, okay, we have spent money to get certain age groups vaccinated. Let's now move away from that age group. So even if it's within 3% and it's 97%, there's some people who may not be honest in polls. There's some people who may not want to answer polls. There's always going to be that margin of error. And all that says is we're going to deploy our resources in another age group because we are pretty much at 100% at that age group. So unlike some posts that call me a liar when I post this stuff, this is how statistics work. It's how math works. If you may not understand something, but you're welcome to call and ask or send a message and do so publicly, as opposed to, yelling and screaming in ignorance if you don't fully understand how math works. And those that are impacted know who they are. Okay, I am sorry I'm guessing we froze a couple times today. I'm sorry for that. I don't know what the issue is. I'll try to restart it or reset it. As I said, my internet looks great, but it's happening for multiple people. So clearly it's an issue on my end. That said, I hope everyone has an amazing night, and I'll do my best to be on tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I hope to see you then. Have a great night.